New this month on CBC Gem.
You're trending.
Fantastic.
You retweeted a white supremacist.
Retweeted a what?
An author goes viral and is hit with a major plot twist, a son he never knew.
I'm on a quest to understand who I am and where I come from.
Now they're both on a journey to find themselves.
Our beloved children's author getting to know his long-lost autistic son. There could be a book in it.
Could be a documentary.
The heartwarming series, Austin. Watch free on CBC Gem.
You know the feeling of finding a really good podcast? Or the feeling of someone always being there, like your favorite radio show? Stream CBC Podcasts, CBC Music, and CBC Radio anytime, anywhere.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon, I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At noon, it's partly cloudy and 2 downtown. It's 3 in Sprague and minus 11 in Tuduli Lake. Donald Trump is headed back to the White House after securing at least 277 electoral votes. Republicans have also regained control of the U.S. Senate, and they have a shot at retaining control of the House. Karen Pauls reports on what it means for the Trump presidency.
A complete united Republican government would give President-elect Donald Trump untethered power to pursue his priority policies, provide a blank check for his to-do list, like overhauling the federal government, extending tax cuts, putting tariffs on foreign goods, deporting undocumented migrants. He may have an opportunity to appoint 2 more justices to the Supreme Court. Trump also has the power to roll back many of the programs of the last 4 years. Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio says voters have sent a message.
This is not a college football game where we celebrate because our team won. They're not sending us up there to celebrate. They're sending us up there to work.
Republican control of the House is not a done deal yet. There are many close races, so it could take days to call it. But if the Democrats want to slow Trump's agenda, they'll have to persuade other Republicans to oppose him. Karen Pauls, CBC News, Washington.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau congratulated Donald Trump on his way into today's Liberal caucus meeting, calling it a decisive victory.
I look forward to working with President Trump once again to strengthen North American economic opportunities for the middle class, to grow our economies in ways that make us competitive around the world, to protect North America from the many, many challenges that exist around the world.
Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland says she understands the anxiety some Canadians are feeling, but she insists Canada, in her words, will be fine. That, however, is far from assured. The Canada-US-Mexico agreement negotiated during Trump's first presidency is up for renewal in 2026, and the U.S. has already indicated it wants new concessions. European leaders are offering their congratulations to the new president-elect, but beyond protocol lies a number of concerns. They are worried about Trump's declared policies, including his pledge to slap tariffs on imports. His threat to cut NATO funding is also unsettling at a time when Russia is becoming more aggressive. Abby Kuvasan has more.
Within hours of Donald Trump's victory, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz spoke not only to his citizens, but the rest of the continent as well. Scholz said many things will be different under the new U.S. administration. Trump, defined by his America First policies, pledged to impose a 10% tariff on all EU imports. Most member states are also concerned about Washington's dedication to NATO at a time when the alliance is trying to help Ukraine while grappling with Russian aggression on its eastern flank. Scholz said he's already spoken with his French counterpart Emmanuel Macron and says the EU must stand closely together and act in a united manner. European leaders were already scheduled to meet in Budapest on Thursday to discuss challenges to the bloc, and Trump returning to the White House is one they'll have to tackle head-on. Abby Kuvasan, CBC News, Berlin.
Our neighbors to the south remain a red state after yesterday's vote. Harold Ness in Fargo, North Dakota, says he voted for Donald Trump because he believes the country needs a major change, and he wasn't impressed with the Democratic Party campaign.
I think that, Harris and Waltz, I don't think they just were able to gain traction. They were kind of, he had Biden running for re-election, then all of a sudden they changed horses in midstream, and I think that's what shot him down.
Larry Wild voted for Kamala Harris and is not happy with the result.
This is the only country that you can elect a convicted felon, a pathological liar, a womanizer, a defrauder of the funds, and that's just the start.
Wild says despite the outcome, the sun will rise and the U.S. will carry on. A Quebec man has been acquitted of 2 murder charges dating back over 4 decades. In 1983, Claude Paquin was convicted of ordering the murder of 2 men 5 years earlier. He spent 18 years behind bars and was paroled in 2001. The case was based on the testimony of an informant who had lied and cashed in on his testimony. Today, following a new trial this year requested by the federal justice minister, the Superior Court announced Paquin's acquittal. And a British doctor faces 31 years in prison after injecting his mother's boyfriend with poison, saying it was a COVID-19 vaccine. Donning a nurse's outfit, Dr. Thomas Kwan disguised himself while making home visits to inject Patrick O'Hara with a flesh-eating poison because he believed the older man stood in the way of him inheriting his mother's home someday. A judge says Kwan's audacious scheme almost worked. The 53-year-old doctor pleaded guilty to attempted murder last month. And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 12:30. In Winnipeg today, a mix of sun and cloud, a high of +3. Brandon, cloudy, a high of +4. In Thompson, cloudy, 60% chance of flurries, and a high of -1.
Good afternoon and welcome to Radio Noon. Yes, the sun has risen on another day and we're still here one day after the American election. That was quite surprising to a lot of people. And Trump will be president, it seems. And guess what we'll be talking about on the show today? Our call-in is about exactly that. What's on your mind one day after? What impact will a Trump presidency have on us? That's the question. Give us a call, 204-780-0893. And also, a resurrected novel of residential school life has a new life and is providing a very seldom heard point of view. That's at 12:15. But first up, we are going to talk about food hampers needed this holiday at the Brandon Cheerboard. You are listening to CBC Radio 1. You're at 89.3 FM, 990 AM. I'm Laurie Hoogstraten. The number of families applying for food hampers across the province is at an all-time high. The nonprofit Brandon Westman Christmas Cheerboard says it can manage 1,100 hampers, but they're expecting applications for 1,500 hampers. Cynthia Wright is with the Brandon Christmas Cheerboard. She spoke to CBC's Chelsea Kemp about how they're trying to fill that gap.
So yeah, that's really our need, and that's where we push the publicity, is to try and get people involved in, you know, if they're having a festive event at their work, everybody donate a little bit and nominate 2 people to go out and do the shopping for the groceries or the toys. If you adopt a family, you get a really specific list, and then you can get your own gifts and whatnot on top of that. So yeah, we really appreciate that shopping aspect. And I think it's a really great thing for community groups to connect with the family that they are donating to, you know, that they can deliver it themselves and the family can thank them in person. And that's a really nice festive exchange. I think it's really important too. Some of the kids are already looking forward to it. They're all like, yay, this is going to be great.
People applying, why does it keep growing and why does it grow so much?
Well, like, you know, the whole multiple thing, I think, happening in our community, right? It's, you know, food insecurity, access to affordable housing, all of those things that happen. And I think it's such a squeeze in the winter. You know, we just feel like as Christmas cheer, we want to make sure they get knitted items and socks and, you know, that whole temperature change that happens in our community. It just seems to drive that need up, making sure they have, you know, enough food. We can't supply a lot of produce, but we really try and make sure they have pantry items, you know. Yeah, I think it's that multi-pronged concern with climate, with housing, with food insecurity, and a lot of new families that come into our community that maybe don't know how to access services, need that assistance and extra help for families that are vulnerable, especially around the winter season. I mean, we support everybody at Christmas Cheer.
Cynthia Wright with the Brandon Westman Christmas Cheer Board. Morden, Verdon, and Winkler are also seeing a spike in demand. Kemp spoke with Morden Cheer Board's Chelsea Delacki.
So in our 2023 season, we had 364 hampers that went out, which was an increase of over 2022 by, I believe, 50 hampers, I want to say. And we're anticipating our 2024 season to go up to over 400 hampers. So to give a little bit of like a number of people supported, 2023 was 1,000 people, or just over 1,000 people.
How do you keep up with that kind of demand?
The very generous community, I would say. So our program runs completely on donations. So donations from local businesses, individuals in the area. We have a lot of really generous businesses and teams and groups that do fundraising on behalf of Morden Christmas Cheer. So they'll host a hockey game that it's admission by donation. Or we have a lot of, I know last year Adult Ed they did a toy drive, like all of those kinds of fun things. But yeah, we keep up by the generosity of our community. The biggest challenge we've been up against this year for sure is the rising cost of groceries. So we've gone away from giving actual tangible food items, except for some food donations, which allows people, and have done gift cards instead, which allows people to go and purchase, foods that they enjoy, that they cook, that they're going to actually, want to eat, for lack of better terms, especially with we have so many new cultures and different families and whatnot moving into the community. And we've found then that dollar amount for gift cards, we have to be really aware how much that's actually going to cover. So we've had to increase our amounts. This is the second year in a row that we've had to reevaluate and look at how much we're donating or putting in our hampers, and make sure our donations can cover that then. It's amazing and it's heartwarming to see how much people are willing to give, because everybody is going through a tough time, right? Cost of living is going up. So yeah, it kind of reinstills the whole good feeling of community support.
That was Morden Cheer Board's Chelsea Delacki. Chantel Hutchison lives in Brandon and has 2 kids. She says the rising cost of living has her counting on the Christmas Cheer Board to help with the holidays. Kemp first asked how she's managing family expenses.
Could be a million times better, in all honesty. I'm on disability, and it's nowhere near enough to survive off of.
How do you kind of how do you do it? What is your day-to-day like?
My partner and I basically go without food most of the time, just so that way our kids can eat. For my partner and I, we go and buy a bag of chips because it's $1.25, and that's our meals generally. Because we can't afford to eat as often as we should, and one big meal that we have is supper time.
And so what's it like kind of getting ready for the holidays then?
Stressful, because I have no idea what we're going to do, what we're going to eat, how we're going to do stuff. I've even had to ask friends and my own mom for help with food for us, or cat food for our cats, because we can't afford everything that we should be able to afford in Canada.
So how important does that make something like Christmas Cheer for your family?
It's huge. It's probably the only way we could do a Christmas supper for the kids.
Do you use the Samaritan House Food Bank too?
Yes, I do.
What do you think would make the biggest difference right now in terms of helping your family?
Well, more affordable housing would be nice, and I'm meaning not $2,000 plus for a 3-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom house. I don't know anyone that could live and survive off of that when you have to do all your bills, plus make sure that your kids have food for school.
It sounds like it's just a fight to survive.
It is, and it's heartbreaking and it's devastating.
So, like, how long have you used Off Like Christmas Cheer?
We've been using the Christmas cheer for the last 8 years almost. We signed up again this year.
That was Chantal Hutchison speaking with the CBC's Chelsea Kemp in Brandon. You can read more on this story on our website, cbc.ca/Manitoba.
Hi, I'm Saroja Coelho, host of the Saturday afternoon call-in show Just Asking, now expanding to 2 hours.
And I'm Ian Hannamansing, host of the Sunday afternoon call-in show Cross Country Checkup.
Whether it's world events
or what's happening in your backyard,
every weekend we connect Canada live.
That's Just Asking with Saroja Coelho, Saturday afternoons at 4 Eastern.
And Cross Country Checkup with Ian Hannamansing, Sunday afternoons at 4 Eastern on CBC Radio 1.
You're listening to Radio Noon. I'm Laurie Hoogstraten. Coming up later in the program, with Donald Trump as president-elect, what's on your mind? What impact will a Trump presidency have on Manitobans? That's the question for our call-in conversation coming up after the 12:30 news. Give us a call at 204-780-0893. And a resurrected novel of residential school life with the ironic title of Brown Tom's School Days provides a seldom heard point of view. That story in just a minute. And taking a look at the forecast. Okay, let's see now. Winnipeg, mix of sun and clouds, highs of +3 today, partly cloudy tonight. Winds out of the southwest at 20 and lows of -3. And on Thursday, mainly sunny day with winds out of the southwest and highs of 9. Actually, it looks like the weather is staying pretty nice. I'm looking at Winnipeg for Saturday and Sunday, both 13 degrees in November. Something's weird about that. And to look a little further along, next week looks, well, +3, still above 0 on Monday and Tuesday. So we're having an ease into November. Some temperatures for you around the province at this hour. In Brandon, it's 1. Churchill, -11 with light snow. Guess it's winter there. Dauphin is 0. Gimli is 3. The Paw reporting 0. Thompson, it's -2. And here in Winnipeg right now, it's mostly cloudy and 2 degrees. United Church minister and residential school survivor Ines Montour wrote a book called Brown Tom's School Days in 1985. It was a rare chronicle of federal Indian schooling in the early 20th century. Montour, who attended the Mount Elgin Residential School, originally self-published the novel for the benefit of friends and family. Now there's a new edition that adds editor and U of W professor Mary Jane Logan McCallum's insights into the literary and historical context of Montour's life. Mary Jane is an expert in the field of Indigenous studies. Hello.
Hi, Laurie.
So can you give us the context for the title, Brown Tom's School Days?
Absolutely. Brown Tom's School Days is a reference to a mid-19th century story that was very, very popular about a boy who went to a private school in England, in Rugby, England, and the original title was Tom Brown's School Days. This is a very, very popular book that really initiated a whole genre of school stories that were very popular in England and Canada and the United States.
But the way the story goes, as I recall, in Tom Brown's School Days is Tom emerges triumphant, the bad guy is punished, and the teacher is practically a saint. I'm guessing that the title is somewhat ironic in this case?
Yes. Yeah. I think it's part of Ines Montour's sense of humor to sort of twist this a little bit around and make it, instead of a private school in England, an Indian residential school in Canada. And so he sort of tells the story about a boy named Brown Tom and his experiences at the school, and those stories that he collects about Tom's experiences show a very, very different kind of context for schooling.
So what are some of the stories that he shares? What are the threads?
He shares basically a chronology, kind of starting at residential school, the first day feeling very disoriented and missing home, all the way up to when he and his friends graduate from the school and their aspirations for the future. So there's little stories in there that are kind of lighthearted, but still get across the very serious context of Indian residential schools at the time. So there is discussion of hunger. I think he mentions the word hunger, a number of times. His book is almost, half about food, actually. There is discussion of a fellow student who contracts tuberculosis and is taken away from the school, presumably, to where he passes away. There's discussions about the staff at the school who were, real life people. They are people who show up in the records of the residential school at the time, including the principal, who was a reverend in the United Church as well. So there's a lot about the landscape of the area, which is presented as like teeming with life and in movement, in constant movement, which is just a beautiful way to think about that area of the world.
And what time are we talking about?
So I think he began schooling at Mount Elgin in 1909, and he attended until about 1915.
And this is quite an unusual document, I understand. Is that just a general rarity of people keeping diaries or keeping track or talking at all about their residential school experience?
Absolutely. So it's a time period beyond living memory. And so that is, first of all, quite rare. Second of all, in the records of Mount Elgin Industrial School, there's a real gap in information about the students who attended and other aspects of the school, including, correspondence between people, the structure itself. Between that early 1900 era to about 1930. And those records aren't there to tell us much about what went on. But also, most of the records were written by the principal and other staff members, as well as members of the church and visitors who were non-Indigenous.
Right.
So the idea of actually getting a boy's perspective at the time is just a real, treasure for lots of us.
Sure. And how did the book come to your attention?
Well, I read a reference to it in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission final report. And I know somebody had told me about it at some point, likely during my MA research. But I decided, that's it, I got to go find this book. So the only copy that I could find was at the National Library in Ottawa. And so you actually have to go there. There's a non-lending library. So I went. I was on a research trip anyway, but I went there and found it, and I was just delighted. And I thought, oh, it's just such a shame that it is, relatively inaccessible to researchers and others who would be interested, I think, in this perspective. And so that's when I sort of went to the University of Manitoba Press to talk about making a second edition.
And will you be able to use it as a teaching tool?
I think it would be a great teaching tool myself. So I think it tells us a lot about the history of the school itself. But I think it also tells us a lot about where we were in terms of a conversation about residential schools in the 1980s. So he is, a survivor of the school and somebody who spent his entire career within the church. And he is, he writes about the school, what we might think of as like kind of in hesitant ways or holding back. And I think, he's very careful about not being too critical of the church. And his focus instead is on the characters, the First Nations characters in the book. But I think that we can read that now as very characteristic of a time before the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I think that report itself really broadened the way that we can talk about residential schools, the extent that we now talk about systemic abuse and undereducation, and the long-term legacies of residential school is so much broader now than I think what is portrayed in this particular book, given that the book wasn't aiming for that kind of a story to begin with.
And what were you able to contribute to this second edition?
That's right. So I was able to kind of put the book in the context of residential school history, but also Indigenous publishing at the time, sort of looking at Ines Montour's book in the context of 1970s and 80s Indigenous publishing. And also in the context of my family history. Ines Montour attended the residential school at the same time as my great-grandfather and a few of his siblings. And also thinking about the importance of the book to communities along the Thames River in Ontario, and also the surrounding settler communities there too.
And just as a final question, is it a good read?
It is a great read, and there are just gems in there. You can tell he loves writing and he loves reading. He's very, very well read. So he draws a lot from popular American and British literature at the time. So it's all, and the Bible, of course. So there's all kinds of, it's almost like a puzzle to read, but you can also read it the way I originally read it, which is a straight, a history of the school at the time. But yeah, I love it. It's a great book. Yeah.
Well, it sounds absolutely fascinating. Thank you for taking the time to tell us about it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Mary Jane Logan McCallum is an expert in Indigenous studies at the University of Winnipeg. The book launch for Brown Tom School Days is tomorrow, Thursday, November 7th at McNally Robinson at 7 p.m. Well, here's some news for fans of the late, great Gordon Lightfoot. You can now own a piece of his musical history. Up for auction until November 17th, Gord's birthday. I call him Gord. You can bid on some of his most personal possessions. For sale is a variety of guitars, artwork, amplifiers, contracts, outfits, and jewelry. All of it from Lightfoot's estate. The collection is being auctioned by Texas-based Heritage Auctions, and it is not without controversy, as some Lightfoot fans are wondering why these items aren't going to a museum. One of the pieces of history on sale is the certified gold plaque for his album, Complete Greatest Hits. And from that album, here is Gordon Lightfoot and Early Morning Rain.
In the early morning rain, with $1 in my hand, with an aching in my heart, and my pockets full of sand. I'm a long way from home, and I miss my loved ones so. In the early morning rain, no place to go, out on runway number 9, big 707 set to go, but I'm stuck here in the grass where the cold wind blows. Now the liquor tasted good and the women all work fast. Well, there she goes, my friend. Well, she's rolling down at last. Hear the mighty engines roar, see the silver bird on high. She's away and westward bound, far above the clouds she'll fly, where the morning rain don't fall and the sun always shines. She'll be flying over my home in about 3 hours' time. This old airport's got me down. It's no earthly good to me, 'cause I'm stuck here on the ground, as cold and drunk as I can be. You can't jump a jet plane like you can a freight train, so I'd best be on the way.
Gordon Lightfoot and Early Morning Rain. The Canadian folk legend died last year at 84, and some of his stuff is up for auction at Heritage Auctions out of Texas. Call me after the 12:30 news. We want to talk about what's happening. Donald Trump is president-elect. Let me know how you're feeling about it. Share 204-780-0893. The news is next.
This is CBC News. Good afternoon. I'm Josh Crabb in Winnipeg. At 12:30, it's partly cloudy and 2 downtown. It's 2 in Brandon and -11 in Tuduli Lake. Manitoba's southern neighbor, North Dakota, went solidly for Donald Trump, who won the U.S. presidential election. But there are some in Fargo who are struggling with the election outcome. Nancy Garvey was tech support for Fargo Public Schools before she retired. She voted for Kamala Harris.
Tough for looking at our children, our grandchildren. We'll get through. We're okay. I worry for the future. It's going to be a long battle to get our country back. But we will.
Glenn Wittenberg, meantime, calls himself a conservative and voted for Donald Trump. He says he voted for change.
Well, I think, because the majority of people thought we were going in the wrong direction, and I as well. So now I think we have a chance of going in the right direction. We'll see.
Wittenberg says the economy is one of his biggest concerns because as a retiree, his dollar doesn't go as far as it used to. The Trump triumph has left the Harris campaign and Democrats searching for answers on their decisive loss. As the CBC's Richard Madden reports from Philadelphia, it appears the messaging from the Harris campaign wasn't clear enough.
Yeah, well, there'll be an autopsy from her campaign, absolutely. But it appears that the vice president just underperformed. In other words, she needed to exceed turnout in the cities and the suburbs to offset Trump's gains in the rural areas, but clearly that didn't happen. In fact, she did worse running up the numbers in many parts of this country than Biden did in 2020. You would hear voters saying they still didn't know who she was or what she really stood for, and her key message on social justice issues just didn't appear to resonate or motivate the base as much as they thought they would. So as I noted, there'll be an autopsy of the Harris campaign, but the early buzz is that people are pointing fingers at a disconnected campaign leadership that apparently ignored warning signs from troops on the ground. Richard Madden, CBC News, Philadelphia.
And U.S. markets skyrocketed on the news of the Trump victory. Shares of banks, oil companies, even newspapers are all surging, encouraged by a decisive electoral victory. Also receiving a boost, Elon Musk's Tesla Motor Company, as well as the cryptocurrency sector. Musk, who also owns X, formerly known as Twitter, endorsed Trump and contributed tens of millions of dollars to his campaign. And that is CBC News from Winnipeg. Your next local news is at 1:30.
Thanks very much, Josh.
You're welcome.
And with me in the studio now is weather specialist Riley Lachak. How are you doing, Riley?
Oh, coming to bring some snow.
Snow?
Not to northern Manitoba.
Well, still, for those in northern Manitoba,
yeah,
it's important.
Albeit in my long-range forecast, I do have Winnipeg getting maybe a little bit of snow into the middle of next week.
Oh.
Still a little ways out yet. Like, we're still a week out forecast could change between now and then, but I've at least included it in there to start to get you prepared now.
Soften us up a bit.
Soften us up a bit before that really lands in our laps here. Right now, temperatures after a foggy start to the morning across southern Manitoba, 2 degrees in Winnipeg right now. Portage is at 3. Zeros through the Pas, Swan River, and Dauphin. Thompson's at -2. Churchill at -11 at the moment. These temperatures much, much, much closer to seasonal for this time of the year. So this is where we sort of should be through the afternoon hours. We'll climb a couple degrees yet across southern Manitoba, but yeah, this is more like it in terms of the fall, the November temperatures that we should be seeing for this time of the year. That cloud's still hanging around, albeit when I was walking in about an hour ago, there was still, there's a couple patches of blue out there. So there's some sunny breaks starting to break into the cloud deck out there. I think that we'll not start to see some substantial clearing until we get later into the afternoon here in southern Manitoba. Radar picking up a couple of stray flurries, particularly through the Interlake. I know Riding Mountain National Park into Dauphin, Swan River, picking up a skiff of snow overnight last night. Radar, some of this may not even be making it to the ground by this point in the day, but certainly the risk out there for a couple flurries if you're in the Interlake through the early part of the afternoon here. For the rest of the day, we start to see some clearing. We're back to a mainly clear sky even by 7, 8 o'clock tonight here in the Red River Valley. Mostly clear. We'll even get some sunshine by the end of the day through the Brandon region. What I want to talk about, though, is an area of low pressure moving into northern Manitoba. This is dropping south from the Northwest Territories, skirting along the territorial boundary. And what this will bring is some accumulating snow to parts of northern Manitoba. Flin Flon, Lynn Lake, through the Thompson, Gillam, Shamattawa region. Draw a line across that part of northern Manitoba, sort of that north central part of the province. That's where we have that risk of accumulating snow in the range of 2 to 5 centimeters. Areas north of that, say along the Hudson Bay coast, maybe a centimeter or 2. Same goes for places like Tuduli Lake. That happens through the day Thursday. As we get into Friday, back to a mainly sunny sky, high pressure dominating our weather pattern here in Manitoba once again. And that's going to warm our temperatures up for the weekend and really clear us out as we get into Friday and Saturday. So I mentioned some of that snow, some of the numbers in specific right now. Gillam, Shamattawa looking at about that 5 centimeter mark. Thompson, Lynn Lake, that 2 to 4 at the moment is what we're looking at by the time we get to about this time on Thursday. Today's forecast, Winnipeg, I've got us at a high of 4 this afternoon. Brandon also a high of 4 this afternoon. Clearing skies west to east. Thompson at -1. And your long range, I've got 8s for Thursday and Friday for Winnipeg. Bumping up to 12 on Saturday, 10 for Sunday, and then we start to see some cloud building in as we get into Monday, and then we get that chance of some light snow moving in Tuesday into early Wednesday. So.
Well, that sounds like November, and thank you for using the phrase "a skiff of snow."
I
love that phrase.
It's like, that's the best way to describe it. Like it's not like an accumulating snow. It's just like that little bit on the car first thing in the
dump
morning.
of snow.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. No,
sounds kind of harsh.
Yeah, it does. Thanks, Riley.
You're welcome.
That's weather specialist Riley Lachuk, and you can hear him this afternoon on Up to Speed, and of course you can see him on television on the CBC News at 6. You're listening to Radio Noon. It is 23 minutes before 1 o'clock. And our call-in question today, now that Donald Trump has won the American election, what's on your mind? And what do you think the impact of a Trump presidency will have on Manitobans? Give us a call, 204-780-0893, or you can text us at 204-588-7355. Republican Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States. Trump, who is 78, is the first person to win 2 non-consecutive presidential terms since the late 1800s. He's also the first to ever hold the nation's highest office as a convicted felon. The victory was sealed when swing state Wisconsin and its 10 electoral college votes were called for Trump by the U.S. networks, putting him over the 270 electoral college votes needed to win the presidency. The results raise a lot of questions for us here in Canada. How are you feeling today about the results, and what impact do you think a Trump presidency will have on us here in Manitoba? Give us a call, 204-780-0893. And joining us by Zoom is Christopher Adams. He is adjunct professor, political studies, University of Manitoba, and the author of Politics in Manitoba. Hello.
Hi, Laurie. Nice to be on your show today.
Oh, it's great to have you with us. Thank you. So did you stay up and watch the results roll in?
I did with two of our sons, and we're going back and forth talking about things, and they were quite interested. And it was quite a dramatic evening. It wasn't what I expected to have happen. I thought it'd go much later into the night, as you said, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin. That sort of put Trump over the top. But I didn't think that we would know until in the next couple of days who would win. So it was quite an interesting evening.
Yeah, it was a very interesting evening. And was it a huge surprise to like absolutely everybody? Because, you know, I mean, a couple elections ago, they certainly got the polls wrong. Were people predicting this or not really?
Well, you know, I went through all the states, and looked at the polling at all the states, and all those swing seats like Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin, those were declared by the pollsters, generally speaking, as too close to call. So that's why I thought it would take a long time for us to know who would be the victor in this campaign. Much like 2020, we didn't know for weeks as to who had won the election, but
Right.
this time around, I think it was much to the surprise of many people that we found out well before 3 a.m. as to who was winning.
Yeah, very surprising. Well, we have people on the line already, so I think we will go directly there, but still have room, so give us a call, 204-780-0893, and tell us what you think about the results of the American election. Let me see. Hello, Graham.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for having me on.
Oh, pleasure.
So I am actually I'm a dual citizen of Canada and the United States, and moved up a few months ago from Minnesota to Winnipeg. My family's from here, and that was actually the impetus for that move was, you know, our queer teenagers telling us about Project 2025, which is like the big conservative playbook that is sort of their plan for, quote, making America great again. And we decided that it was time to move for the safety of the kids. And so we kind of, like I said, we saw the writing on the wall, and we're not surprised, but definitely saddened to see the results. And it's been a rough morning for especially for the kids. But yeah, it's been wild to watch all of the build up to the election, and just seeing how, you know, they were just like, it's so hard to explain how all of this stuff came about, and to see the missed steps, you know, from like the Democratic Party and the ways that they were sort of catering to like their sort of top elite donors and things like that. And it felt like they were kind of ignoring what regular people like us were saying. I don't know. It's just, it's wild. It's wild to watch it from here too, and to be here while all of this has been unfolding.
Well, very interesting to hear
really
from
happy
you.
that we're here.
Yeah, and very interesting to hear from you that you saw these things, and I think many of us might say we saw this coming, or it might have happened, but you actually took action on this, and now you're here.
We did, and I, you know, that wasn't a thing that we took lightly too, because we realized that for a lot of people, you know, especially marginalized people in the United States, you know, being able to do something like move to Canada is not a thing that they're able to do, and so, you know, it was the thing that we really took with a lot of gravity, that like we have the privilege of being able to do that and having that as an option. And I certainly hope that, you know, I'm sure that in the next months and couple of years, Canada's probably going to see an influx of people coming up from the United States for that very reason. And I hope that it works out well for everybody.
Well, thank you very much for your call. And if you'd like to get in on the conversation, do give us a call, 204-780-0893. Our question today is, how are you feeling about the results of the American election? 204-780-0893. Let's return to the phone lines. We have Deborah on the line. Hello, Deborah.
Hello, Lori.
What are you thinking today?
Well, I must say my house was full of grief this morning, and we really had serious talks about the best way to move forward personally, because it was really a devastating result for us.
Personally?
Pardon me?
Are you talking personally?
Well, my partner renounced her American citizenship last year, so this is the first election that she hasn't voted in. But I just feel like I have to put this in some kind of perspective to have any kind of hope for the planet at all. And one of the things that I see happening now that I'm concerned about, and they're talking about on the news, is that Donald Trump put himself in the position of being the person who was offering change. And typically in elections, the person who is offering a change is often the one that is more successful. And counter to that, what I saw happening is that Kamala Harris had 107 days to get something together that would separate her campaign from the Biden administration. And I think that it was a gargantuan, impossible task, and that she did as well as she did. I think that's commendable, and I think that's hopeful.
That's thank you for that, Deborah. And I'm going to ask Chris if he will what he thinks about that analysis. Chris, do you think it was largely a matter of Harris not having enough time to get her message out?
Well, there is a general consensus that Trump was able to tie her very closely to the Biden administration. So if people are thinking they didn't do very well in the economy under Biden, or they think things are going south in terms of the quality of their life, and Kamala Harris had just come in, just in the summertime, people were buying into Trump's attachment of her to the Biden administration. And after all, she was the vice president during that. So there is a general sense that those seeking change were looking for change from Biden, who was fairly unpopular. One of the other things too that came up, Laurie, is Graham's comment about being a dual citizen and moving his family up to Canada. People did that, as you know, during the Vietnam War, in fact, illegally in many ways, draft dodgers. But also, I've known people during the Bush Jr. administration during the Iraq War who didn't want their sons to be drafted for that war. So we have a close connection to the United States, just being within 100 miles of the border. So Canadians very much have been watching this election, and they know they will be affected by the change from the Biden administration over to the Trump administration.
Mm-hmm. And it was interesting hearing the commentators say that Kamala Harris had underperformed in certain regions, and also that Trump had attracted groups of voters that one wouldn't normally expect him to attract. What's that about?
Well, Trump, in the New York Times Daily this morning, they're commenting that Trump in the previous election had like a 35% favorability rating, and in this election, 50% favorability. So there was a sense in people were almost accepting him in spite of his quirks or problematic behaviors. So I think that people, especially those who voted for Trump, who might object to his type of personality or unpredictability, might say, a pox to all politicians, regardless of what political stripe. And I'm willing to live with Trump's foibles or poor character, because all politicians have a poor character. So I think in some ways, a lot of swing voters were willing to go over to Trump.
And what do you think they're talking about in Kamala Harris's war room right now? What are the points that they'll be bringing up to each other in what went on?
Well, I suspect there might be some finger pointing, but what was quite striking is that she didn't give a concession speech to her people late in the night when it was clear that Trump had won. I don't recall a presidential candidate being in that situation and not giving a speech when it was clear having lost. And I think she's speaking at Johns Hopkins today to her supporters, but that was quite striking. It's obvious that they didn't expect to have such a bad defeat. And I do know that the pollsters were thinking, okay, it could be one or the other. We didn't see the projections as we saw when Hillary Clinton got defeated. You might remember, Lori, it was like 70, 80, 90% probability of Hillary Clinton winning, and then everybody was quite shocked that Trump had won.
Yeah.
So I suspect there'll be a lot of self-examination in the Democratic Party, and this is the second time a strong woman candidate was defeated by the Republican Trump.
Well, and also criticism, I think, that was leveled at Clinton in the time, and Graham brought it up, was that Kamala Harris and the Democrats were sort of targeting the elite, it seemed to be, and that people might have felt disenfranchised by her message.
Well, the coalition, the long-lasting coalition between the working class and the Democratic Party, going back to Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s, that apparently has fallen apart now. Clearly, last night that's fallen apart, as many working class people don't look to the Democrats to be their salvation, whereas it's more like the college-educated people are looking at Kamala Harris. So the Democrats really have to reconsider where they are located in terms of the union vote or the non-union blue-collar classes, to who is their friend. And it looks like many of them see that the Republicans as their friend rather than the Democrats.
And I wonder about the economic effect on Manitoba. And in fact, to people listening, do give us a call if you feel you might be affected in some way, either in travel or your work or something like that, at 204-780-0893 if you think the change in government in the United States is going to affect you. I was wondering, do you think, will there be direct effects on Manitoba? I suppose tariffs might play into it, or tourism.
Well, if he does implement his campaign promises, he said across-the-board tariffs on all imports. Whether he can effectively put that in, I'm not so sure. One thing, Lori, is that we've seen the Senate has swung over to the Republicans, that the Senate could pass whatever initiatives the president now puts forward. We're still waiting, as I understand it, the House of Representatives as to which way that will go. It's likely to go Republican. So that means his ideas about maybe dismantling public health care, the Obamacare, or putting in tariffs, or doing things internationally that might be against Canadian interests, that he has a better chance of implementing his desires compared to this time round, compared to when he was his first term round. The other thing that we have to watch for is, what about the international stage? He's a protectionist, but he's also an isolationist. So that might have ramifications on different parts of the world, including the Ukrainian-Russian war that's going on. Is that if we know that he has sympathies with Putin, what does that mean? And for many Manitobans who are very concerned about the Ukraine invasion by Russia, they're very concerned about how that will play out, and it will play out differently under Trump than under Kamala Harris.
And also, how different do you think this presidency will be from his first go-round? Because it makes me think, it used to be, when he was elected, people will say, oh, everybody that sort of held their nose and voted for Trump is now seeing the reality of it. But it was a pretty wild ride when he was president, and yet here he is back.
Yeah, so I think that one thing, as I was mentioning, the Congress will probably play along with his initiatives. I think also he's angry. He's angrier than he was last time, and he's going to have vengeance. And there'll be a lot of people who will be watching their backside, people who were part of the criminal justice system who went after him, people who didn't fix the ballots as he asked them to in places like Atlanta or in Michigan. So he's going to be on a witch hunt, looking for people he is angry with. If I were Pence, I'd be a little bit worried as to what he's going to do in power. So I think that's the other thing. And the other thing too, Lori, is, the United States is built on, structurally is built on separation of powers, quite different than our parliamentary system. And I mentioned Congress is going to be more on side with him, but also the judiciary is the Supreme Court is loaded with judges who he appointed, and they've made decisions that allow him to be protected from criminal justice if he's doing these actions while in performing his office's duties. So the Supreme Court will not be challenging him in the same way as the courts were last time in his first term.
Well, let's return to the phone lines and get the point of view of Court. Hello, Court.
Hey there.
Hi. What would you like to say?
Yeah, I think for me, just, I've been in the cannabis industry since legalization in Canada here. And when, Biden was coming in, we saw a large surge in Canadian cannabis stocks. And I think, there's a lot of people sort of hinging on a Democratic leader to bring the federal legalization to the forefront in the U.S. market. And I think a lot of Canadian producers are poised to enter that market if they haven't already in the states where medical is available. So I think in terms of, people working in that sector, I'm sure that a lot of them are very upset to hear that it was a Democratic loss last night.
Interesting, because we were asking people about the economic effects in Manitoba, and of course, particularly so much is important cross-border. Yeah. Well, thanks for your call, Court, and I'll ask Chris to comment on that.
So, if you're in the cannabis industry, I wouldn't give up hope with Trump as the president. He's very much a libertarian. That is, he wants people to sort of practice their own individual freedoms, right or wrong. And so there might be an opportunity that Trump would go along with liberalization of cannabis laws. On the other hand, though, he is kind of a law and order type president, so he might be listening to folks who are saying to clamp down on things such as cannabis. But I would not give up on Trump on this policy. He might be movable on this, but he is a libertarian in many ways. But also, I think that it'll be interesting. One thing with Trump is he's not a well-organized person. He's not a self-disciplined person. And many of the things that he says he'll be doing, we have to watch out to see whether he's actually got the self-discipline to move things through to their final destination, unlike Obama or unlike his predecessors who have been able to say, I have a long-range plan, I'm going to work on that. He's much more of a reactionary president, and that'll have some real ramifications.
Well, before I let you go, what effect do you think the Trump presidency might have on our own federal election outcomes next year?
Laurie, I've been asked that a few times. One of the things is that you look at the polling data. Probe Research came out with a poll of Manitobans about who they would vote for, and about a quarter of Manitobans said they would have voted for Trump the other day. David Coletto, Abacus Research national polling, put out data, and about a quarter of Canadians are saying they would have voted Trump. So there is a core group that are this right-of-center populist-oriented folks, and that feeds into Poilievre's support, but also Poilievre will be pulling in people from other parts of the electorate if an election comes up in the next short while. So I think it would affect that, but not strongly. I think that we pretty well know what happens down in the U.S., but we're a very different system here. But I think there will be people who might be energized on the center right regarding this.
Lots to talk about, and thanks very much for being with us to just dip into it a little bit, Chris.
Glad to be with you, Laurie.
Bye-bye. That's Chris Adams. He's adjunct professor in political studies at the University of Manitoba and the author of Politics in Manitoba. Yeah, lots to talk about as we were saying. And just while we still have a second here, I want to let people know that that tributes are continuing to pour in for the Honorable Justice Murray Sinclair, and we want to hear from you. Give us our listener line a call and tell us what your thoughts and memories are about Murray Sinclair. 204-788-3797. You can leave us a message. And today, we have special guests in the studio. This must be Take Your Kid to Work Day, because they're not really kids. They're young adults. They're people observing radio being made. So a special thank you to our studio helpers today, Will and Mathilde, and also thanks as usual to May McKillop, director Wendy Parker, and YouTube live stream guy Kevin Nipatebo. It's been very nice being here on the radio with you. Quite a day, bit different. Everybody woke up a little stunned this morning, I think, from watching the results roll in for the American election. So good to have Chris Adams here to kind of shake it all down for us and help us think about what's going to happen next. We don't know. But we'll bring you another nice show full of noonish things tomorrow. Join us on Radio Noon. I'm Laurie Hoogstraten. Enjoy the day. There's no snow in the south yet, but it's coming, says Riley. Talk to you soon. Bye.